Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the best channel in the world, I read 'em. Today we've got another ProRevenge episode, and before we get into the video, please make sure you like, subscribe, click the bell icon, comment down below any opinion about this video and I'll try to reply, and yeah, so let's get on with the video then. Mock my mother's death, I bankrupt you. So this could be a very long story. I'll try to summarise it where and when I can. My now ex-wife Kate and I moved to a flat in 2010. The houses as a whole was a renovated townhouse split between two sides with 2 apartments on the bottom and 2 apartments upstairs, addresses ending in 126 and 128 accordingly. Wasn't the biggest fan of the flat as it was a much older building that I'd ever lived in, but I quickly adjusted to the wood creaking throughout the night. On the initial walkthrough, we noticed that the only problem was that there was a dip in the bathroom ceiling. The landlord, Jay, promised us he would get it fixed ASAP. 1 year to the day we moved in, there was a loud crash at 4 AM. The bathroom ceiling had collapsed and there was tiling and wood all over the floor and in the bathtub. Now Kate was typically the aggressive one, while I was a more passive and laid back, and she kept calling Jay throughout the day. When she got in touch with him at around 9 PM, she explained what happened and insisted that it be fixed immediately. Jay rebuffed, yelling that his girlfriend was a lawyer and he didn't need to do anything. Now, this is where I got angry. I went outside to have a cigarette and to call him myself. I feigned a relaxed demeanour and at his first and began to try talking to me as a bro, and kept saying, "Dude, I'm gonna get someone out there but it's gonna take a few weeks." When he couldn't sway me that it was that way, he began yelling about his girlfriend and her knowing the law. What he was unaware of was that I had read the tenant laws in my state, and so as he tried to lie, I waited until he was finished, then I recited the law stating that if an apartment was considered uninhabitable when the landlord needed to pay for the tenant to stay in a place until it was resolved, meaning he would have to pay for us to stay in a hotel of our choosing every night until the ceiling was fixed. He tried to say that our upstairs neighbour Phil was super, but he wasn't sure if he could get him down there that night. He placed me on hold, then came back a few minutes later and said that Phil and his girlfriend were out of state. Wow, I mean, this landlord's a pretty awful person. He didn't fix the ceiling for a year either. He said he would do it before they moved in and it took a whole year, and now he's trying to scam them. Yeah, not a great person so far. I rang Phil's doorbell and asked, with Jay on speakerphone, if he was assigned as a super. He laughed and said no. Dejected, Jay said he would have people out there the next day. Previously, he said they were busy for at least 3 weeks. There's more to this incident, but it leads to 2 conclusions. 1, if you're going to lie, then there has to be a consistency in your lie, and make sure that the people you lie to don't communicate with each other. 2, this is where a feud started between me and my Kate versus him and his mother. She was the original landlord and gave the house to him so he could begin to make a side profit. Fast forward to a year later, Jay stopped coming to the house and his mum began to do the pickups. Around this time, my ex and I had been laid off and we were working with Social Security for food, health and housing insurance. We were approached for all 3 in April, but we did not get the cheque until May. When our typical cheque wasn't in the landlord's mailbox, he immediately gave a summons saying he would take us to court for eviction. The day we went to court, he had no lawyer, and going before the judge, here's a summation, or rather non-verbation account of how the case went. Judge, does the defence have a means to pay within 90 days of non-payment? Us, yes, Your Honour. Hands over paperwork showing he will be reimbursed for April and May. Judge, I see no problem. They are breaking no laws. Why are we here? Jay, well, Your Honour, they have been bullying. Judge, I don't care. Unless they are breaking a law, then this case is dismissed. Suffice to say, Jay and his mother were not happy. Around this time in my life, things are tumultuous. My mother, who had been battling lung cancer for 4.5 years, succumbed to it in June. This happened at roughly the same time his mum came knocking, looking for payment. I explained that I would leave the cheque in the mailbox when we got back home from the funeral, to please respect my right to mourn. She took her fingers and began rubbing them together, pretending to play the world's smallest violin. I'm sorry, but how disrespectful is that? Someone's mother has just passed away after 4 years of battling with cancer, and then you do something like that. These people have no souls. I'll never forget what she said next. Ooh, my mummy just died. Woe is me. She probably had it coming. I don't care if your entire family is dead, I want my money. She smiled smugly, proud with what she had just said. I saw red and my heart jumped out of my throat. I went, grabbed the check and handed it to her in absolute shock that anyone would say something so. I fricked up. She had finally managed to push a button that very few people I've known throughout my life had gotten close to pressing. I went into rage mode, but not in the way you expect. The revenge. We were always told that if a health inspector came by to not open the door. I waited until August, since that was a month before the lease was going to run out, we knew would not extend a renewal. I walked up to the block town hall, asked for a health inspection of our property. It was scheduled for several days later. Now it's important to know several things. 1. I was friends of all the tenants. Phil had moved out with his fiancée, but the new tenant was a really cool girl around my age named Danny. Tom and Hannah on the other side of the downstairs floor had moved out in July and Jay was still looking to fill it. The only one who wanted to stay out of this was Rose on the upper right apartment. I'd gotten permission and her spare key so I could let the inspector in Danny's apartment, and I knew that I could use the back staircase on the right side to let him in on Tom's now vacant apartment. 3. I also knew that Danny was moving out in September, a month after Kate and myself. The inspector came and it was glorious. He checked the exterior of the house and first noting that wires were exposed, there was an old empty dryer along with other clutter in the garden. I brought him inside and he shared the entrance, and I was counting on, he noticed that the last inspected date back to 1994, 18 years. This means that for each year he did not have an inspection, there would be appropriate fines. For our flat, we had black mould growing in our bathroom, and the bubble in the ceiling had begun to regrow to problematic proportions. Upstairs, Danny's apartment was suffering from leaks in the ceiling, and it looked like her bathroom ceiling was also on the brink of collapsing. We then went to the basement. The boiler was on the verge of exploding. There were flammable items along with gasoline and a pack of matches sitting right beside it. 2 things that I did not know was, 1. The fire door that had separated the 2 sides did not close all the way, rendering it useless. To be honest, I'd never heard of a fire door until that day. On the right, 128 portion basement, there was a side toilet, a toilet that had blown up. It coated the surrounding walls, and the leak had prevented us going up the floor via the right side. The entire time the inspector was photographing and writing constantly. Oh my gosh, this building seems like a horrible accident waiting to happen. We stepped outside and he said he needed to come back. When I asked why, he said he had run out of space to write down all of the infractions. He had filled the front and he had written an entire page on the back portion. I kindly and coaxingly asked, well, how much will it cost right now? He scratched his head and said almost 20-30k from what I can see, but it's probably going to be higher as this house is never licensed to be split into flats. I thanked him and he was going to come back with the county inspector. We were gone when that took place, so I did ask him to send me a copy with the list of violations to my new address. So we moved out at the end of August, but I got the updates from Rose. Because he was the current owner, he owned all the fines and no one could move into the empty flats until everything was up to code. Because 3 or 4 were vacant and he was losing $4,500 in potential rent, he handed the property back to his mother and had to file for bankruptcy. Now here's the other thing. Every time an old tenant left and a new one was coming, an inspection was supposed to be done. Now that all the financial burden fell on her as they looked into the records, and she was fined for each time she had broken that rule, £750 per person. By the end of the year, Rose had moved out, so the place was hemorrhaging money. I sat back, proud of what I'd done, and let it be. Haha, holy frick that, I wasn't close to done yet. I felt like I'd destroyed Jay, but my real target had always been his mum. I learned that she had 8 properties throughout 3 towns in my county. I went to each one, spoke to the tenant, and said I was a concerned tenant for another property, and asked if they had any problems with their flats. Every person I asked described their flats as being very poor, intolerable levels, and that their mum was effectively a slumlord. She would ignore these problems unless someone turned to litigations. She was threatened that they would summon the inspector, or, more often than not, the people would move out. She'd refuse their deposit and sink those into cosmetic repairs so that the flat looked nicely furnished. People rarely thought back because she knew that the occupants were of upper lower class minorities. So being the concerned person I was, I wanted to the inspector of the other 2 towns and asked for an inspection to be done with at least one tenant, if not more, would be awaiting the inspector when they came. Turns out she had faced pretty much the same infractions on every flat she owned. It turned out that she actually had 12 flats, but I initially only knew about the ones that fell within my county. The remaining properties that in the next county were given a mysterious heads up to perform a surprise inspection. From what I can tell, Jay's mum had been in the landlord business for 35 to 40 years. That collapsed quickly. Since we moved literally 1 block down the road from our old one, 54, I got to see Jay losing his primary source of income and have to claim bankruptcy, but also saw his mother was trying to desperately find a buyer for all of the flats so she could pay off the fines. I learned 2 years later, 2014, that she had to file for bankruptcy. Jay and his mother camped out in the front of our next apartment for 2 days in October of 2013 before she filed for bankruptcy. I'm guessing to scream at me and or Kate. So I called the police and said there were strange people standing in a no parking zone and they kept looking up at the 2nd floor. A cruiser swung by and told them to leave. I know I should have used the 2 months I spent monitoring everything to find a new job, but this was the one and only time I wanted to cripple a person where they hurt the most, their wallets. I think I got my point across. None of this would have happened if they just did their freaking job and fixed the ceiling before it collapsed. Yay. TLDR, had a couple of slumlords and they pushed me into a place where I snapped, and so I went a bit crazy and bankrupted the landlord and the slumlord mother as well. So yeah, that was a pretty horrible story. I mean, imagine all those people with the living conditions they were living in, and then also the mother said that about his mother after she died. So yeah, that's a pretty horrible story. So they absolutely got the revenge they deserved. They both had to file for bankruptcy and they didn't have a house. Yeah, they deserve that. Edit. Did some editing for clarification purposes, but I wanted to thank you all. I never expected to have anything I posted get anything other than a few hundred likes. I'm especially grateful for those that gifted me awards. Thank you so much. I wanted to clear up a few things that people have frequently left comments about. 1. I was always taught to use wit versus physical confrontation. What she said to me was a sucker punch, and I was already in a state of shock from holding my mum's hand when she took her last breath, asked to write a eulogy, and create 2 memory boards. I was already on autopilot when she said what she did, and the way I reached was more me dissociating than anything else. If it was after the ceremony, I may have punched her until she's unable to stand up, whereupon I would continue to pummel her until someone pulled me off her. She reminded me a lot of Professor Umbridge from Harry Potter, both in her mannerisms and attitude. 2. Why did I not go outside when they camped in front of my new address? 2 reasons. The first one being that the full brunt of my revenge had not fully played out yet, and secondly because I hoped that the cop would give her a ticket. If he did, it was a little bit less money, and she'd know that I was the one responsible. 3. Did they know it was me? Yes, they did. I called Jay for the deposit back after 90 days were over. You needed to allot the landlord 90 days to pay you. I knew he wasn't going to though. When we left, I went around every room and took photos of every angle. I also had a friend, Justin, who did the same with his camera. Like a good tenant, should I also ask the inspector to take photographs to show that we had caused no significant damage? When Jay told me that he had messed up the walls and the wood was warped, I responded with, "That's not what the inspector I called in said." He immediately hung up and blocked me. I lost the deposit, but this was still completely worth it. On an unrelated note, and much more petty side, before I moved out I would go to the front lawn where he put up the sign saying there was an open apartment, Tom and Hannah's, and put down his phone number. Each night I would use a marker to change the last 2 numbers. The modification was noticeable if you walked during the day, but since I had the same marker and colour, then if you were driving by you couldn't really tell. Every few days the sign would be replaced, and by the next morning the modified number would be back. Even once we left, Jay was still not taking the whole "cannot rent until building is up to code" seriously, and so he was still putting up the signs. Since I was still in vengeance mode and I lived on the same block, I began to not only change the number but also began printing out signs that read, "You do not want to live here, trust me. Signed, your friendly neighbourhood tenant." That lasted until he took down the sign for good around November. Wow, okay, so that was a long story too, and yeah, I also think the revenge was completely deserved. I mean, those two people seem like a horrible pair. The amount of people, again, who lived in bad quality housing and things, it was just awful. Like, and not no inspections in 1994, that's just really unsafe. And also the dodgy boiler with all the fuel downstairs, I mean, people could have died because of that. Anyway, thank you everyone for watching the video. Please make sure you like, comment, subscribe, click the bell icon for more videos. Yeah, if you leave a comment about any of the stories, I will try and respond to all of them. So yeah, also check out my other videos, and again, thank you for watching, and bye.